Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are. Hosted by Desiree Duffy.
Welcome to Books That Make You. I'm Desiree Duffy, and we're talking about books that make you see the real world through a fantasy world. How's that work, huh? Fantasy. I mean, it's a genre that is probably the most imaginative and free-flowing. Nearly anything can happen in a fantasy world, right? There could be hobbits on a quest. There might be dragons, magic, flying carpets, witches, monster, and the worlds have rules that are completely different than our own reality. Now, that's the neat thing about fantasy, is that when we start flipping things around like that, it can be eye-opening because it's an allegory for our real world. In other words, we can see how societal behaviors, attitudes, prejudices really are when we see them played out in a fantasy world. Do you remember there was that old Star Trek episode? This always hangs with me. I was probably just a little girl when I saw it for the first time, but they had the episode where some of the people on the planet had a black and white face, and the other people had a white and black face. And they were at odds with each other. They were at war. They hated each other. They were prejudiced against each other. And Captain Kirk and the crew, they couldn't figure out why these people hated each other, because when they looked at them, they looked virtually the same. Black and white face, white and black face. And then it was revealed that those who had the right side, that was white, were against those who had the left side, that was white. It was just a reversal. I mean, how silly, right? And that was like holding up a mirror to society, because we realized here we are and we're at odds with people just because of a slight difference in the color of our skin. Silly, right? Our guest today is someone who wanted her fantasy novel to treat relationships and love. I mean, come on. What else can be better than relationships and love, right? She wanted those to be seen and treated with equality, regardless of the gender. And the cool thing is she did it because of her brother. And, might I add, she did it splendidly. Nanishka Torres is the author of the Fenrir Chronicles, The Prince, and she is the guest here today with us on Books That Make You. Nanishka, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
I'm excited to have you.
Me too.
So tell me, now what do you think? Let's get your thoughts. You can weigh in on this, on how fantasy and other types of fiction too hold up this mirror to society. Tell us what your thoughts are on that.
I think you hit the nail, you hit it right on the head. I mean, it's a wonderful way for artists to criticize and shed light on the shortcomings of our societies, to depict it in a fantasy way, because that lures you in, that gets your attention. You want to see this story, and it's not until you've sat through it and you've seen the nuances and the struggles that you then realize that it's a reflection of the struggles people deal with every day. So I think it's just such a wonderful way to bring it to the forefront and make people see that there's a problem, see that there's ways to work around it, and almost kind of the way you described it with the Star Trek episode, to see the lunacy of what we're doing, that we're hating people because they love someone that we think they shouldn't, or that they look a way that doesn't look like us. It all seems so nonsensical when I think brought to a fantasy forefront, because we're seeing it from a third party perspective. And if we're not in it, we can see it a little bit more objectively. And that just allows people to see kind of just how ridiculous some of these feuds we have with other people are. And it's a wonderful thing to use art and fiction in that way.
Yeah, I think ultimately that is the true power of art, fiction, writing, film,
Absolutely.
Visual arts are the same way, is the fact that, it can make those statements to us. And I love the way you phrased it. It really does. It shows the lunacy, the silliness of it. It's like, oh my God, that's just ridiculous that you would consider that to be, a negative thing.
Right.
And it digs deep into the, it's gender, it's who you love, it could be the color of your skin, the fact that you worship a god and you give that god a different name than somebody else, but yet it's the same god. Like that one always kind of gets to me a little bit.
Oh, absolutely.
So let's talk about how you explore this theme in your writing. Can you tell us a little bit about your book, The Prince, and how you use this idea when you're crafting your story?
I would love to talk more about me and what I've done. As you mentioned previously, with The Prince, I wanted a story. I knew first and foremost that I wanted a protagonist whom was gay and that their sexuality had nothing to do with the problems that they were facing. Because there's so few books or movies or TV shows that depict the LGBTQ community in general. That's such a marginalized group, and they're not shown very often on the silver screen or in novels. And then when they are, their sexuality drives the plot. It drives the story. It's as if there is nothing more to them than them coming out, coming to terms with their sexuality, and dealing with the prejudices and the bigotry of other people. And I thought that was just such an unfair pigeonhole to kind of stick this whole community of people. They're people. They have other issues. There's so much more to them than their sexuality. Why is it that a heterosexual hero can save the world, deal with inner conflict, have a villain to fight, and their romantic status has no influence over that? But with a gay character, there's nothing more to them. There's nothing else that drives their struggle than being gay. So I wanted to change that. I wanted to normalize homosexuality because it is normal. It's common. There's nothing odd looking about it. So that's why I so badly wanted a character whom had other issues, and his relationship is actually the only thing not causing him problems. That everything else is kind of going askew, and this man that he loves is a stable figure, and there's nothing wrong in the relationship. He doesn't have to come out to his parents. The society accepts him. There's nothing odd about that. His relationship has no bearing on what's occurring because there's just so many other stories that need to be told. So that's really what I wanted to do, show the normalization, and that, their relationship status or their sexuality doesn't have to be the only story that's ever told.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right, and there are lots of great stories, books, movies, etc., that do have a gay protagonist who it's their coming out story, or it's about the challenges that they faced. And all of that is good and fine. It's not that that's necessarily a negative, because those stories should be told.
Absolutely.
But yes, you hit the nail on the head with the idea of it doesn't always have to be about that. It can be, again, it's normalization, and it's just these are people experiencing love and relationships, and bam, here we are. It's a fairy tale. It's very much like a classic fairy tale, or saving the victim that was taken away, etc. And I just mad props for doing that, because you're absolutely right. That is how a lot of times, unfortunately, different genders are portrayed in the media. And sometimes, too, that's how they'll portray them if they happen to be the protagonist or a main character. A lot of times, too, then they're regulated to kind of like the sidekick role.
Oh, yes. With the plucky comic relief, almost, yeah.
Yeah. And that's not quite fair either, because then they become one-dimensional.
Exactly.
And, the stereotypes are so prevalent then. And again, it gives the world kind of the skewed view of people who are just people. They just happen to choose to love whom they choose to love.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about writing fantasy in general. Why do you like writing fantasy as opposed to anything else?
I've definitely been someone who has lived in her imagination her entire life. I've always been drawn to fantasy stories, especially stories of people with superpowers. I'm pretty sure that I've finally concluded that since I won't get superpowers, I will write people who have them, and I can that way live vicariously through them. But I've always just been so enthralled by these just magical worlds that are so different from ours in some aspects, and then so similar to ours in other aspects. You know, while there might be world with elves and fairies and vampires, they're still having the very similar struggles that we do. Self-acceptance, feeling part of their community, feeling like they need to give something to their community, you know, or being ostracized from a different community. Like, there's just so much that we can relate to through fantasy, but then we get the extra level of people with superpowers, people who are of different species and can do all these incredible things, as well as still having those humane traits that, you know, we deal with every day. So I've always just been such a huge fan, especially of like Marvel comics I've been reading since I was in kindergarten. And I've just always loved the fantastical part of these special abilities and these people whom should, in a way, are superior to humans because they can do things that humans are physically incapable of doing. And yet they're still struggling with very human issues because they still are, a lot of them are human, and just, it's amazing to see such incredible characters be brought to such a relatable and understanding level.
And that it's very true with the Marvel universe or fantasy or superheroes in general. They have a superpower, but yet they always have that flaw. Absolutely. And that's what makes them relatable, because we all have flaws too. And if somebody who, you know, can fly in the sky or stop bullets with their chest or whatever is also flawed, it helps the reader, it helps people, it helps children, adults as well, not only relate to them, but also see that within themselves that their flaws might not be quite so bad after all.
Right, that they can still be a hero despite, you know, what struggles they might be facing.
Exactly. So tell me this. Well, I happen to think, just so you know, I think that your superpower is writing.
Oh, thank you.
That is a superpower after all. Not everybody can write, and especially not as well as you can. So.
Oh, thank you so much.
So what would be your superpower if you could pick one? Like, would you want to fly, be invisible? What would yours be?
Telekinesis. It's the same answer I've had since I was about 5 years old. I want to move things with my mind so badly. And I may or may not keep trying. I would move everything, because with telekinesis, you could also fly since you can lift your own body. So I wouldn't need a car. I'd fly everywhere. So there goes car insurance. The money I would save.
You'd save money, right?
And then feeding myself without moving, because I could just float the Fruit Loops in from the kitchen. It would be fabulous.
So your superpower would be sitting on the couch eating Fruit Loops without using your hands or getting up.
Exactly. If that's not what happiness is, I don't know what is.
I love it. That's great. So tell us a little bit more about the prince. And you don't have to reveal the, entire story, but give us the setup, give us the scenery, describe the world a little bit.
So the prince takes place in a realm known as Fenrir, and it's ruled by a queen, Queen Thestera, and her son, Prince Callum. And, of course, that's, spoiler alert, the prince that we're following. And in this realm, there's a group of religious radicals whom kidnap the man that Callum loves. His name is Lorcan. And thus kind of erupting this mission for Callum to bring Lorcan back home. And while he's so narrow-mindedly focused on bringing back the man he loves and making sure that no harm comes to him, because I was really writing from my heart in that point, that if anything were to happen to someone I cared about, I would pretty much destroy everything in my path to make sure that they were safe. And he's kind of a little bit blinded by a bigger picture and a bigger issue that he really needs to face head on. And the world of Fenrir, it takes place in the future, but there's a lot of pieces that make it feel a little bit of medieval, but with flying cars. So it's kind of a cool juxtaposition of time and what we think of when we think of a queen and think of a prince. And think of a damsel in distress, because Lorcan is definitely not one of those, even though he was taken. So I was definitely trying to kind of tweak the audience's perception of a lot of things, of what a queen should be, because this queen's a soldier, of what a prince should be, because he won't just take things lying down. You know, even though Lorcan was kidnapped and he's a victim, he doesn't let things just happen, and he's not going to go down without a fight. So I definitely wanted to kind of redefine a lot of the ideas and preconceived notions people have about characters very similar to these.
Right. And I love that. I love the fact that you don't allow your victims to necessarily be weak, because victims aren't always weak. And that's another false perception, I think, that we have a lot of times.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love the names, too. How did you come up with the names?
Oof. A lot were trial and error. So Lorcan had about 3 different names before I finally came to Lorcan. But a lot of times it's just what do I like how it sounds? I've always loved the name Callum. I thought it was so pretty. And then others I kind of find a part of a name, and then I twist a little bit. So Thestera, I think, started off as Teresa. And I was just I like how that looks, but I want it a little bit tweaked. And so I would kind of add letters and add different sounds that I thought sounded cool. So it was a lot of just talking to myself and seeing what names made sense.
I love it. I love it. Well, all good writers, I think, have to talk to themselves.
Right, at least once.
Yes. Can you tell me how it is that you conceptualize this world? Because you have elements of the old and the new colliding. Where did that come from? How'd you do that?
A lot of that, I feel like it came to me as the story kind of unfolded. It grew and morphed over time, but a lot of it was chosen from what I liked. So I've always loved the idea of a royal family living in this big castle, but I wanted it to be modern, or more so futuristic, because there's so much incredible things we can do with technology on top of that. And I've always loved Star Wars and how they depict technology and where it goes. So I just thought it'd be so cool to put those almost opposite ends of a time spectrum next to each other. What it would look like to have a huge stone castle while people are using holographic cell phones, and they can see people speaking to them. And I always loved putting those items together, because it's almost not what you expect. And one of the common comments that I would receive when people would read The Prince is that they were thrown off by the technology, because when they think of a prince, when they think of a castle, they think medieval times. They think horses and carriages like Game of Thrones. They're definitely not expecting technology. But then I have to remind them that there is a royal family that lives right now in a castle, and they have cell phones and they have social media. They have access to these things, and they're very much living in the present day. So it's kind of fun to bring something that people, stick into one time period and then put it next to a time period that we're not expecting. And it's just, I think, such a fun combination, and allows for a lot of different stories that can erupt from there.
Yeah. And it's cool that it catches people a little bit off guard, because that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it not a fan, because we kind of know what a fantasy world is. We get it. Tolkien basically created the foundation for every fantasy world in existence.
Absolutely.
If I say this story has elves in it, we conjure up what an elf is. Before Tolkien, nobody really did that, not in that way. But what you've done, and mad props to you for doing it, is take in that quote-unquote traditional fantasy world and kind of spun it around and given it a modern flair. So congratulations for doing that and doing that so well.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad it conveyed well, and people have seemed to accepted it even while they were reading. Like once they realized, oh, okay, this is not in the medieval times, and this is not Game of Thronesy. Like this is today or the future. Like they kind of seemed right into it. So I'm glad that even though it might have taken them off guard, it felt natural and realistic to fall into.
Absolutely. Well, and the characters, too, are natural and realistic. And I think that helps drive the story a lot,
That's
too.
the biggest compliment I could get.
It's true. It's true. So tell me, you're mentioning Game of Thrones. You've mentioned Marvel. Who inspires you? Are there writers? Are there stories? Where do you draw your inspiration from?
Definitely Marvel is a huge inspiration for a lot of things. I feel, very beautifully mesh these people whom are almost godlike in a lot of ways and make them so humane and relatable, and you root for them. And even though there's a guy flying around in an iron suit, or there's a super soldier or a god, you're still seeing them fall and fail, and you root for them to succeed. And I think that's such an amazing thing and so inspiring, because it's so difficult to write a hero that you want to succeed, because either they might be too perfect and you want them to fail just out of bitterness, or you don't like them because they have too many flaws and you don't want to support them, and are they even a protagonist at that point? So I feel they're such an inspiration to me with how they've woven that so well in so many of their characters. And then I also have to give a big thanks to R.L. Stine, because he was one of the first writers I'd ever read, and I was obsessed with all of his books when I was a kid. And through junior high and high school, till this day, he puts out a book, I'm going to read it, because he got me writing. Reading his books when I was about 5 or 6. That's when I started writing. So,
oh, wow. You started very young.
Yeah. I was writing full, pages of stories in kindergarten class. Those were my favorite assignments.
You're like, bring on the book report. I want to do it.
Absolutely. Yes, give me a picture prompt. I will write a story off of that. Give it.
So tell me, what are you reading right now? Or what books would you recommend for people to read right now? What's on your hot list?
The book I actually just finished not too long ago is Beat the Reaper by Josh Bazel. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name correctly. But that was such a fun read, and so just encompassing. As soon as I started reading it, the first sentence gets you right in. So I highly recommend that one. It's very fun. It's about a physician in New York City whom is actually in the witness protection program, and the mafia find out that he's still alive and where he works, and they kind of descend upon him, trying to kill him. So it's super fun, just him trying to use everything at his disposal, all of his intelligence and his training to weasel out of it, and it's so funny. And he's one of those heroes that you're absolutely rooting for, no matter, even though he's done horrible things, you're behind him all the way. And then I just received a whole series of new books that I have to start, which I'm very excited about, but they're called Ex-Heroes, and I'm blanking on the writer's name, so I'm slightly mortified at that. But it's the general premise is if a zombie apocalypse hit the world, in a world where there are superheroes. So in the world of Marvel, if the zombie apocalypse hit, how would the heroes kind of respond? And some heroes are turned into monsters, while the other heroes have to try to survive. So I'm really excited to delve into that, because of course it's right up my alley. Superheroes and zombies, you don't get better than that.
I know, right?
The
I'm a big
combination.
Yes. Give me anything zombies. I'm the biggest zombie fan ever. Can't wait for Walking Dead to start back up again.
Oh gosh, yeah. My heart couldn't handle that show anymore. I was just, you know what? I have been through too much pain.
And that's a great series as well, a great graphic novel series.
Yeah, one of my best friends has binged through every novel, and she absolutely loves it. And she can't stop raving about it.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me, who do you think should read your book? Who would you recommend it for?
Ooh, I would recommend it. A lot of people ask me, like, what age. So I definitely recommend it for any young adult through a 30-year-old. I mean, because the main characters are not young. They're late 20s, early 30s. I mean, not young in comparison to young adult. Young in life, but. And basically, to anyone whom has ever enjoyed, I feel, Harry Potter, The Mortal Instruments, Game of Thrones, if you enjoy a fantasy world with characters that you want to get to know and you want to support and join them on the path that they're on, I feel The Prince is for you, because I wrote it with the people in mind, not just the story, but that these were characters that I wanted to know and I wanted to be friends with and I wanted to fight alongside. So really, if you love bonding to characters and maybe getting too attached, I feel The Prince is definitely for you.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And definitely you will. I can attest to the fact that you will become attached to these characters. I know I am. So, and that leads me to, so what are you working on next? Can we expect book 2 soon? Maybe?
Sadly, not soon.
Oh, okay.
But I am working on book 2. Writer's block is owning me a little bit harder than I was expecting, but it definitely is in the works, and I'm really hoping to have it completed. I'm thinking next year, and that way I can get it out hopefully toward the end of next year. So that's definitely the goal, but it is in the works, and I just want to make sure I do all the characters justice.
Oh, that's fabulous. Well, and, that's the thing. Good writing takes time. It's not something to be rushed. So that's commendable that you're doing that. That's, the quality people come to expect. And I know writer's block, that can be quite a hurdle to get over. What are some of the things that you do when you write? Do you have a routine? Do you have a ritual? What are some of the things that you do to try to get around writer's block?
I love taking notes. I'm a big note taker. So I have a lot of notes of where I want the story to go, how I want these characters to change, what they're going to be going through. So a lot of times I'll go through my notes again. I'll try out different routes, because my biggest difficulty is that I know where I am and I know where I want to end up, but linking those two places cohesively and logically so that the reader can easily follow along and say, like, yep, those are the steps that would lead to there. That's the biggest hurdle for me. So I'm constantly writing out a scene. I mean, like, do I like that? Can I read that again? Probably not. Delete and try again. So a lot of it is, let me try this. No. Let me try that. No. All right. And I just keep taking notes and noting different ways that I could possibly get there, what would be the best way. So it's just a lot of writing and rewriting.
Yeah. Well, that's what you got to do. Yep. That's how you do it. So where can people find you online, and where can they find The Prince?
The Prince can be found on Amazon, and it's also on Audible and iTunes, because there is an audiobook version done by the amazing Michael Furiolo. He was absolutely wonderful. And music is composed on that audiobook, too, by David Ricco. So it sounds super awesome, not just biased because it's mine, but it's actually really great. And then you can find me. I'm on Instagram, Nanishka Torres. I'm also on Twitter, even though I hardly check it. And I'm on Facebook as well, facebook.com/Nani, Nani, writes, and that's writes as in a writer. And yeah, those are the main social media plugs for me.
Awesome. And I can attest as well to how wonderful your audiobook is, because that is actually how I read your book. So
yay!
You're right.
I'm so glad.
Oh, I loved it. I love audiobooks because I can do other things. I can drive.
Yes,
and
exactly. And like fully submerge, I feel, with the voices. Like hearing the voices makes such a difference for me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Nanishka, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure having you on the show. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much, Desiree. It was so lovely.
You are welcome. And once again, my name is Desiree Duffy, and thank you for being with us here today on Books That Make You. And you can find out more about the books that make you who you are on our website. It's booksthatmakeyou.com. And you can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Until next time, enjoy all the books that make you who you are.
The executive producer for Books That Make You is Desiree Duffy. Produced and sound mastered by Phil Giangrande. Engineering by Dave Nabox. Social media and promotion by Bree Sweeter. For more, visit booksthatmakeyou.com.